Do we really need a sermon after all of this? We started off with land acknowledgement. The first time this happened, in my experience, was before a comedy show, a live stage comedy show in Vancouver, British Columbia. I was so awed that a commercial group would acknowledge the presence of the original peoples of the land. Later on, I found out British Columbia never had a treaty with the Indians. They simply took over. Like, how do you address something like this? But at least this group, this commercial group, acknowledged it. And then later on, I heard it again before a worship service at a Canadian seminary. And I thought, at least they're on the way, because I have not heard anything like this in Hawaii till now. Thank you. And I'm listening to Zach, and I'm remembering a story I had forgotten. Years ago, I was in a store and began talking with another customer, a grandmother. And she was telling me how she was raising her little grandchild who had HIV. This is years and years ago. People were still pretty nervous about it. And I thought, this poor elderly woman having to do this, raise a small child to who knows when with this condition, having to intercede with her being in school, having to take her to appointments. But she said, oh, I have help. My brothers are helping me. But still, I felt so sorry for her. And then I heard more of her story. She was grateful. She thought she had been a terrible mother. This was her second chance. And you could see it in her demeanor, her face. She looked blessed because she felt blessed, not cursed, in having this little girl in her life. It humbled me because I was coming in with my judgment. Oh, poor thing, you're at this age already. You should be resting on your laurels and you're having to deal with this tough thing. But it really, truly is how they talk about reframing. How do you look at a situation? Do you look at all of its negative parts? Or do you look at it from a different perspective, like this woman? You should have seen her face. This was someone who looked serene and underneath her skin, happy. She was fulfilled. I have stories. I wanted to start with this one. This woman, I don't know her name. I don't know what part of the world she's in, but I know her story. It's a very familiar story. Victim of domestic violence. 10 years she put up with what's now a very familiar story of many women who married men they thought loved them, but who physically and emotionally abused them. And most people who are not in these situations wonder, why don't these women leave as soon as they first, hit whatever? And they'll tell you it's because they love these men. And if there are children involved, even more so, they can't leave. And if you know about these kinds of situations, if you work with social services or whatever, you know that the pattern is it takes about 7 times of a woman trying to leave before she actually does. What holds her? Well, he's done a great job in diminishing her self-worth, persuading her that she deserves all of this, all of the beatings and the harsh words. He typically has been slowly isolating her from friends and family so she doesn't have people to go to. He also, if he can, cuts her off from finances, doesn't want her to work or controls very tightly what money she earns. And the other thing is every time she leaves, she is at most risk for being killed. This woman went through all of that. But she finally packed up and left. Her husband telling her that her dream of being a nurse was stupid, she'd never be a nurse, that nobody would love her. But she survived all of that violence, and she found the man of her dreams, married him, had a child, and went back to school. Now, it was crazy busy because she was working different jobs. She was taking care of a toddler. She was going to school, but she persevered and made it. And she was the only one in her nursing class that got a job as a pediatric OR, operating room nurse. She has a strange hat on her head, and I think that it's a surgery cap. You know, everybody wears really sometimes wild surgery caps. But give her credit. Wherever she is in the world, she made it. She survived, and she's thriving. Next. Now, this woman, I know her. She was working in her family's store, Ueda Shoe Store on University Avenue. I remember buying shoes from there from the time I was in college, off and on. And turns out I know her son and daughter-in-law. This woman, now this is the story I heard. There's no confirmation, but she was going up and down ladders, get those shoe boxes in her 80s. She worked until she was 91. And the only reason she stopped was because at 91, she was washing the store window when she fell, broke her hip. And then she broke her hip at home again, and that ended her career. Guess how old she is? 85, 90, 105. This is a recent picture. You see that she's handling mochi, New Year's Day, Japanese food. But I wish it were bigger. You could see her face, but it is of strength, of joy. She's been retired for 91, 14 years now? She keeps busy with sumo wrestling and puts down her own statistics. And when she's asked, what's your secret? She says, sell shoes. And this title for today's sermon, you can go to some kind of nice picture, is personal for me. Because while October was wonderful, I came here on my birthday for the first time preaching at a UU church, had a wonderful, the best Halloween, preaching at another church, and then going to a special dinner. And then I got to my first Dia de los Muertos celebration on November 2nd. It was heady and wonderful. Then November 6th, I was on my way to preach at another church, walking with a lot of stuff and the loose gravel on the sidewalk. I slipped. Bad. The worst wound I've ever seen, and it was on my body, just below my knee. As someone said, at least you didn't break any bones. I didn't hurt my knee. It was just this big cut below my knee. ER, stitches. I'm worrying about not just the service I'm missing, but also I'm supposed to be doing a baby dedication for a family from Oregon that flew in, and family from Arizona. And I kept thinking, hurry up. It's like, you can't hurry up ER. It's hours. So finally I get a text saying, oh, Kahu came by. And I thought, he did? I didn't. Nobody knew he had been back. He was back. Plane touched down at 9:30. He knew 10:30 was the reception. So he dropped in on his way home from the airport and got to do the baby dedication. So good. Exactly 1 week later, I get the symptoms of Bell's palsy. Because in the next day, I thought, gee, 3 visits to ER in 8 days is not a good record here. I didn't really know that much about it. So I began looking it up and began to understand why these ER people were telling me it might get worse as the days went on, because it develops over a period of usually 72 hours. But I learned something, and so did the ER doctor and a medical resident who got taught by the neurologist. This is the difference between Bell's palsy and stroke. Because, it's still one side of the face. The difference is that in Bell's palsy, you can't move the eyebrow. That's the difference. Of course, they still had to go through all of these different medical, checks anyway. And when I finally got to see a neuro ophthalmologist, she stared at me and said, what a remarkable recovery in 1 month. All the symptoms were gone. Except that I had dry eye, and she said, you got that already anyway before the Bell's palsy. So it's a continuation, the same thing. Okay, you think that's enough, right? 1 week after the next. 2 weeks later, I got tinnitus. And the more rare type, pulsatile tinnitus. It sounds like a whooshing sound or different kinds of sounds with the rhythm of your pulse. And that's still in the middle of diagnosis as to why. I have a hearing test this coming week, and then I get sent to ENT. And that was in the end. At the end of December, I got this massive facial pain that started with 2 bottom molars. And the dentist said, well, it's this upper molar filling that got chipped, and now you got a cavity. And the rest of it, just monitor it. So I'm going to call him tomorrow saying, okay, there's all these different pains come and go on this side of the face. We don't know why. But anyhow, I suspect that there's a tiny crack or something that cannot be seen upon exam or by x-rays. That's what I think. There's something going on. Anyway, so when I chose the Toddler Survive and Thrive, I meant it. That despite all this, I was going to come preach to you. Because if anybody would understand, I think it's this congregation, that I know you're having a hard time as a congregation. Besides your own personal little battles, that you're facing difficulty as a congregation, and that hurts too. Because church communities are really like second families, and for some people, the primary family. So when something goes wrong or isn't right, it really hurts. You can't understand why, but simply bear the pain and ask for wisdom. And I know that this congregation and your denomination is really gung-ho for social justice, but I remember years and years ago reading an article about how social justice movements were losing steam. People were getting burnt out because it's hard work. And this was a secular article, but it said the only groups left that can handle this are churches. As I said, this was a secular article that said, we only got the churches left. Why? Maybe because some people recognize what the Jesuits, a Society of Jesus priests, learned long time ago. Jesuits are really strong in social justice, but they're also very strong in spiritual development. They call it the inner life and the outer life. You cannot have one without the other. The outer life only with going out gung-ho and changing the world is exhausting. You will fail if you only have this. You've got to have the balance of the inner life, the foundation. And if you only have the inner life of prayer and meditation and scripture and all that stuff without the expression, the fruit of the inner life, then that becomes rotten, actually, because it's self-contained. It's meant to be, the spiritual life is meant to be whole, two wings, inner life and outer life. Imagine a bird with only one wing. It doesn't fly. You need both. So I would advise you that even though you are so steeped in social justice, do not forget to develop your inner life of prayer, of meditation, of reading scriptures of all kinds to make sure you have the depth and the foundation to support all of your activities. You are blessed. You may be hurting now, but you are blessed, truly. This is a wonderful congregation. I'm so glad that I've come to know you. I'm inspired by you. Keep on keeping on. Survive, yes. Many people survive. Human race has survived through many disasters. But also thrive. Don't let it get you down. You have wonderful things to be grateful for, thankful for. One thing is music. Thank you, Dennis. and thank your singers. That helps a lot to have music. So gratefully, I'll now end, but thank you. Truly thank you. Amen.